Whispers before the storm, secret agents in a nation still learning to stand. As America struggled to define itself, rival powers planted spies in the shadows long before the first cannon was fired. They said the War of 1812 began when muskets cracked along the Canadian frontier and British ships blockaded the Atlantic coast. But those who truly knew the story, those who kept quiet in dim taverns and traveled by moonlit roads, claimed the war had already started years earlier, in whispers. Long before the first shot was fired, America was a young nation walking on unsteady legs, and in its uncertainty, foreign eyes found opportunity. This is the part of history school books rarely teach. The shadow war fought by secret agents, double dealers, and forgotten patriots who navigated the fragile space between independence and collapse. The nation still learning its name. By 1807, the United States was only 30 years old, legally free, but painfully dependent on the trade routes and politics of the Old World. President Thomas Jefferson had won admiration for expanding the nation with the Louisiana Purchase, but even that bold act revealed the deeper truth. America was still an experiment, uncertain whether it could survive without the protection or manipulation of European powers. Across the sea, Britain and France were locked in the Napoleonic Wars. America, without intending to, became the battleground for influence. Whoever controlled American trade and political loyalty gained an advantage in Europe's conflict. And so the spies arrived. They came disguised as merchants, diplomats, immigrant laborers, and cultural advisors. They walked among Americans, paying careful attention to who grumbled about the government, who longed for stability, and who still nursed loyalty to the British Crown. They took notes, carried coded letters, and fed reports to their masters. The average American never suspected that a silent war was unfolding in their own towns. The harbor where secrets changed hands. In the port city of Baltimore, the smell of tar, salt, and rum hung permanently in the air. Ships came and went from the Caribbean, Canada, and Europe, carrying goods that lined American markets, and secrets that never made it to the customs ledger. At the heart of this web stood Jonas Tuttle, a young shipwright's assistant who never expected to become part of anything larger than repairing hulls and hauling rope. But Jonas had something rare, ears that listened more than they spoke. Every evening, taverns filled with sailors boasting about storms survived, captains arguing over stolen cargo, and merchants whispering about embargoes. Jonas could read between the lines. He knew when a sailor's tale was too polished, when a merchant spoke too cautiously, when a stranger's accent didn't match their claimed homeland. One December night, Jonas overheard two sharply dressed wine traders discussing a shipment from Halifax that was not wine at all. The men exchanged a coded phrase: "The lion's mane grows in winter." Jonas didn't know what it meant, but he knew enough to recognize danger. The next morning, the traders disappeared. Months later, Baltimore would learn that British agents had been slipping through its harbor, bribing ship captains to smuggle intelligence between Canada and London. Jonas had been one breath away from uncovering a spy ring that Congress didn't even believe existed yet. A frontier alive with alliances and intrigue. Far from the bustling coast, in the forests of the Northwest Territory, another set of players entered the silent war. The British viewed native nations as key allies, buffer states who could slow American expansion. American diplomats claimed friendship while simultaneously pushing settlers into native lands. And in the middle sat leaders like Tecumseh, who saw the tightening pressure from the United States and the cautious promises from the British. Into this delicate dance walked Sarah Ward, an American translator working unofficially for the War Department. Her father had traded with native communities for decades, and Sarah had grown up fluent in both the Shawnee and Ottawa languages. She was soft-spoken but observant, traits that made her a perfect intelligence courier. Her mission was simple: gather information about British movements north of Lake Erie. But the truth she uncovered was far more complicated. British envoys were supplying weapons to native confederations. American settlers were ignoring treaty boundaries. And in between, many native warriors debated whether joining the British was the only hope for survival. Sarah recorded conversations, carried letters hidden in her saddle, and memorized trails few Americans ever walked. She did not think of herself as a spy. She thought of herself as a witness, someone trying to prevent a war that felt inevitable. But by 1811, when the Battle of Tippecanoe erupted, she realized the truth. The silent war had grown too loud to contain, and what she knew would soon matter dearly. The British network inside America. While frontier alliances shifted and harbors buzzed with suspicious activity, a far more sophisticated spy network operated in the cities that shaped America's political future. In Washington, Boston, and New York, a man known only as Agent Pierce ran a British intelligence circuit disguised as a scholarly society. The group claimed to collect writings from the classical age, but their books carried hollowed compartments filled with micro-letters. Pierce targeted American politicians who were disillusioned with the embargoes, the loss of trade, and what they saw as poor leadership in Washington. Britain had powerful sympathizers in New England, merchants who relied on British trade and feared war would destroy their livelihood. Pierce offered them information about British naval plans in exchange for political influence. His goal was not simply to spy. It was to fracture American unity from within. He nearly succeeded. Leaked documents, later proven to be Pierce's work, convinced several state representatives that Washington was hiding intelligence about British intentions. Weeks before the actual war began, many Americans believed the threat was exaggerated, a political strategy rather than a real danger. Had Pierce operated even a few months longer, America might have entered the war divided and possibly lost everything. The American counterintelligence that no one remembers. While British agents operated confidently, America had no official intelligence agency. Spies worked ad hoc, often without pay, recognition, or even legal protection. Their names rarely survived in history. One of the most significant among them was Samuel Briggs, a postal inspector from Philadelphia. Briggs noticed irregularities in mail routes, letters arriving from British-controlled Canada sealed with American wax, shipments addressed to non-existent clerks, and coded symbols embedded into the margins of trade invoices. Briggs quietly compiled reports and brought them to Secretary of State James Madison, who immediately saw the scale of British infiltration. Madison's growing frustration with British interference in trade, in maritime affairs, and now in American security would soon fuel his push toward war. But Briggs paid the price. While investigating a Montreal courier route, he vanished. His horse was found near the St. Lawrence River. His body never surfaced. Officially, his disappearance was a tragic accident. Unofficially, he became one of the first American intelligence casualties, a man erased because he saw too much.
The spark no one saw, but everyone felt. By 1812, America felt like a pot about to boil over. Farmers complained about British interference in trade. Sailors cursed the press gangs forcing Americans into British naval service. Politicians shouted across the capital's chamber about honor, defiance, and national survival. But beneath all the noise, those involved in the silent war felt the shift first. Jonas in Baltimore overheard ship captains warning of a blockade imminently tightening like a hangman's noose. Sarah on the frontier saw British envoys meeting openly with native leaders, no longer bothering to hide. The scholars of Agent Pierce's circle suddenly dissolved their meetings. The coded letters stopped. Something was coming. Everyone who lived in the shadows knew it. And then the storm arrived. When President James Madison finally declared war on Britain on June 18, 1812, most Americans believed the conflict began that day. But Jonas, Sarah, Pierce, and the ghosts of agents like Samuel Briggs knew differently. The War of 1812 did not begin with a bang. It began with whispers, the murmurs of secret agents testing a young nation's strength. Betrayal blooming in candlelit rooms, and forgotten heroes acting in silence to defend a republic still learning how to stand. Their stories rarely appear in textbooks. Their work left no statues, no medals, no grand memorials. Yet without them, America's fragile new experiment might have shattered before it ever had a chance to prove itself.
Codes in the harbor, smugglers, sailors, and the battle for hidden intelligence. Beneath the chaos on the waterfront, everyday workers became unexpected couriers of classified secrets. If anyone in 1810 had asked where America hid its most dangerous secrets, few would have guessed the answer: the docks. Not the halls of Congress, not the grand mansions of diplomats, but the muddy, noisy, chaotic waterfronts where ships groaned, crates slammed, sailors cursed, and gulls screamed overhead. It was the last place anyone expected history to pivot. Yet under the reek of tar and tobacco, beneath the drunken laughter spilling out of taverns, codes changed hands like contraband, carrying whispers that shaped the coming War of 1812 long before American leaders fully understood the danger. This is the forgotten story of smugglers and sailors, ordinary workers who, without intending to, became the backbone of a secret intelligence war. The harbor that never slept. Baltimore's Fells Point was a world of its own. Ships from the Caribbean, Nova Scotia, London, and New Orleans crowded the docks so tightly that their masts laced together like a forest. Every plank creaked with commerce, tobacco, flour, lumber, rum, and cotton. But hidden among the legitimate cargo were packages wrapped too carefully, sealed too tightly, delivered too quietly. Few noticed, fewer cared. Baltimore was a city built by hands that knew the weight of rope more than the weight of politics. Most workers never imagined their labor connected them to global alliances or European wars. And yet every day they touched crates concealing coded messages, naval blueprints, or lists of American ships to target on the open sea. In the center of this unknowing intelligence network was Tom Greeley, a dock worker with the shoulders of a mast and the curiosity of a cat. Tom had no education to speak of, but he could read faces like maps and tell a man's story from the way he tied a knot or shouldered a barrel. It was a talent that, one stormy night, saved more than just a shipment of flour. The night the wrong crate arrived. In early 1811, a schooner named Silvertide docked after a trip from Halifax. The captain seemed nervous, too polite, too cautious, wiping his brow despite the cold. He oversaw every crate personally, treating even mundane goods like powder kegs. That alone caught Tom's attention. But what truly set alarm bells ringing was the crate marked simply with a small carved fox symbol. Tom had seen that same mark once before, on a package that a British merchant took straight from the docks toward the home of a known loyalist family. Most dock workers would have ignored it. Tom didn't. When the foreman turned away, Tom cracked open the crate's corner just enough to peek inside. Not flour, not cloth, not anything a ship should carry openly. It was full of letters, hundreds, tightly bound, each sealed with British wax. Coded, of course. The kind of messages spies would kill to protect. Tom quietly closed the crate, pretending nothing was wrong, but he already felt the weight of the discovery pressing on his ribs. Smugglers wearing honest faces. What Tom didn't know yet was that Baltimore harbors were already underway in a sophisticated smuggling network run by merchant Samuel Dorrington, a man with the clean reputation of a philanthropist and the dirty business of feeding intelligence to British naval commanders in Nova Scotia. His method was brilliant. Hire American sailors who couldn't read codes, pay them generously to carry neutral goods, hide British intelligence inside barrels, crates, and fishing tools, use routes disguised as normal trade paths. The perfect crime, because no one suspected that the same men hauling molasses or salted fish were unknowingly transporting military secrets. But his operation had one weakness. It relied on secrecy, and secrecy rarely survives a curious mind. The sailor who read without reading. While Tom discovered the coded crates, another quiet figure was already tangled in the intelligence web. Elias Crow, a wiry, weathered sailor with a scar across his cheek, had worked for Dorrington for years. Elias couldn't read traditional English, but he had an unusual skill. He recognized patterns, shapes, symbols, repetition. He could spot a forged signature or a mismatched seal at a glance. Dorrington trusted him because he seemed harmless, but Elias was far from harmless. He had begun noticing the fox symbol months earlier. It always appeared on crates bound for Halifax or Quebec. It never appeared on local shipments. It never showed up when American customs inspectors inspected goods. He didn't know the meaning, but he knew the symbol carried something darker than rum or sugar. One evening, while unloading a crate marked with the fox, Elias brushed against it and felt the faintest hollow thud, something inside shifting that shouldn't have shifted. He tapped the crate again. Hollow, not fully packed, exactly like a smuggling compartment. Elias said nothing, but his mind lit with suspicion strong enough to burn. The code hidden in plain sight. That same week, a British cutter was spotted lurking off the Chesapeake. The British claimed they were patrolling trade routes. Americans called it intimidation. But neither side knew that the cutter had come specifically for Dorrington's coded letters. Unbeknownst to all but a few, Britain was preparing to tighten its blockade strategies and needed intelligence about American shipbuilding and grain shipments. The fox-marked crates contained field reports from Loyalist families, maps of Baltimore shipyards, and lists of merchants who secretly favored British trade policies. If these letters reached Halifax, the British Navy would gain a deadly advantage. If they were intercepted, it could expose a spy network and potentially save American ships from being targeted. The dock workers become unexpected guardians. Tom didn't know the full truth, but he knew enough to be afraid. He sought out Elias, expecting the seasoned sailor might understand more. They met in a tavern where the lantern light flickered against the damp wooden walls. "That crate wasn't flour," Tom whispered. "Has a fox carved on it. You ever seen that symbol?" Elias froze. "I've seen it too many times." Tom leaned in. "Something bad's inside. Something big." Elias's expression hardened. "Then we don't let it leave the harbor." They weren't spies. They weren't trained. They were dock workers who could be fired or worse for interfering with shipments. But instinct told them something dangerous was happening, and they couldn't ignore it.
The battle of hidden intelligence begins. Dorrington's men moved fast, loading the fox crates under cover of darkness onto a small sloop set to depart before dawn. Tom and Elias followed, keeping to the shadows, both praying no one would ask what they were doing awake at such an hour. When Dorrington himself appeared, overseeing the transfer, Elias realized the magnitude of the danger. The city's most powerful merchant was a spy. Tom whispered, "What do we do now?" Elias replied, "We stop him." Their plan was primitive but effective. Sabotage. While Dorrington counted crates, Tom quietly loosened the sloop's mooring ropes and jammed the rudder with a wedge of driftwood. At sea, the ship would lose steering, forcing it to return to harbor or risk capsizing. Elias went further. He tucked a note, written with help from a literate dockhand, into the pocket of a night watchman stationed by the customs office. "Check the crates marked with a fox. They carry secrets meant for the British Navy." No name, no signature, just a warning. Secrets dragged into the light. By sunrise, the customs officers had opened the crates. The contents shocked the entire city. Maps, lists, letters, coded instructions, reports on American shipbuilding, names of suspected sympathizers. It was irrefutable proof that a British spy ring was operating out of the harbor. Dorrington escaped arrest by fleeing onto a British cutter offshore, but many of his associates were captured. The sloop, unable to steer because of Tom's sabotage, drifted back toward the docks, where authorities seized its remaining cargo. The discovery triggered immediate security reforms along the coast. Harbors tightened inspections, ship manifests became stricter, and Washington finally acknowledged the presence of foreign intelligence operations on American soil. The forgotten heroes of the harbor. Tom and Elias never received credit. Dock workers weren't exactly invited to congressional hearings. Their names didn't enter official reports, but among sailors, their story traveled faster than any coded letter ever could. Some said Tom saved the entire Chesapeake fleet. Others claimed Elias cracked a British code without reading a single word. Neither boasted. They simply returned to work, hauling rope, scrubbing decks, lifting barrels, knowing that the knowledge of what they had stopped was more than enough. And in the months leading to the War of 1812, their quiet interference saved countless American ships from the jaws of British blockades. Harbors where ordinary hands fought an extraordinary war. History often celebrates generals, admirals, and presidents. Rarely does it honor the men who stood knee-deep in mud, lifting crates they did not know contained the fate of nations. But on the docks, in the taverns, and beneath the smoke of shipyards, smugglers and sailors waged their own secret battles, shaping the war before the first cannon roared. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't carry muskets. They carried codes, hidden in crates and barrels, passed unknowingly through their calloused hands. And sometimes, when fate demanded courage, they chose to fight back.
The double face of loyalty, when patriots and traitors shared the same table. Trusted merchants, militia officers, and even lawmakers walked a dangerous tightrope between honor and betrayal. If the War of 1812 was a storm, then the years before it were the uneasy silence, when everyone smiled too politely, spoke too carefully, and hid too much. In taverns lit by wavering candles, at dinner tables in wealthy homes, even in the halls of government, it was impossible to know who served the young republic and who quietly fed its enemies. This is the story of a time when loyalty was currency, betrayal was subtle art, and sometimes patriots and traitors shared the same table without ever revealing their true faces. The city where trust became a luxury. In 1811, New York City was a bustling mosaic of merchants, sailors, politicians, and opportunists. The docks swarmed with cargo from Britain, the Caribbean, and Canada, despite worsening tensions. Newspapers argued fiercely over whether America needed peace or pride. Some citizens believed war was madness. Others believed it was destiny. But underneath the loud debates lay a quieter truth. Foreign gold jingled in American pockets. Foreign promises whispered in American ears. And the line between loyalty and treachery blurred like ink in the rain. At the center of this dangerous swirl stood Jonathan Pierce, a respected merchant whose smiling charm could sell iron to a blacksmith. His ships carried textiles, sugar, lumber, and tools up and down the Atlantic seaboard. To the public, he was a patriot, donating to militia drives, hosting strategy dinners, and advising lawmakers. Privately, he was something else. Jonathan Pierce was a double agent, a merchant with two ledgers. Pierce maintained two sets of books, the visible one for American inspectors and the hidden one that recorded secret shipments to British agents in Halifax and Montreal. His business thrived on contradictions. He sold rope to shipwrights who repaired American vessels. He sold information to British officers planning to sabotage them. Some nights, he toasted American independence with fervor. Other nights, he drank with loyalist sympathizers in hidden rooms of the Stone Harbor Inn. But he justified it all with one belief: a wise man backs both sides. Only fools choose just one. The war had not officially begun, and Pierce wagered that whichever nation emerged strongest would reward him. Yet, his confidence began to crack the night he met Captain Elias Rourke, commander of the New York militia, the officer who saw too much. Captain Rourke was everything Pierce pretended to be: steadfast, principled, and fiercely loyal to the United States. Born to Irish immigrants, he rose through the ranks through discipline rather than connections. He saw the port's tensions as warning signs. He believed war was inevitable, and he hated the men who profited from ambiguity. One rainy evening, Rourke attended a merchant's dinner where Pierce played host. The table glittered with silverware and laughter, but Rourke sensed something amiss immediately. The guests spoke too freely in Pierce's presence, discussed troop movements as if they were gossip, revealed shipping logs as casually as weather forecasts. Rourke watched Pierce carefully. Every time someone mentioned a strategic detail, like the number of cannons stored at Fort Columbus, Pierce's fingers twitched ever so slightly, as though he were mentally filing the information away. Rourke didn't confront him, not yet, but he went home that night with a suspicion sharp enough to carve wood. The lawmaker who walked both sides. If Pierce was a merchant with divided loyalty, Senator Abel Crawford was a lawmaker with two faces. Publicly, he argued for American sovereignty and denounced British impressment of sailors. Privately, his estate was funded by British financiers who owned shares in his companies. Crawford believed he was simply choosing pragmatism, ensuring economic stability for his family if Britain won the looming conflict. But Britain expected more than gratitude. When Crawford received a letter written in invisible ink, he realized he had crossed a threshold. Once decoded, the message read, "Provide information on naval appropriations. Payment doubled for speed." Crawford burned the letter, but not before copying its contents and hiding them inside his desk drawer. He told himself he wasn't betraying his country. He told himself he was buying time. He told himself everyone was playing the same game. But deep down, he knew better. A dinner that changed everything. The unraveling began with a formal dinner at Crawford's estate. an annual event meant to honor militia officers and influential merchants. The table stretched across the room like a battlefield, with crystal goblets reflecting candle flames. Pierce sat near the senator, laughing easily. Rourke sat across from them, watching intently. Crawford sat at the head, his mind heavier than his wineglass. The conversation drifted toward British troop sightings near Canada. Pierce casually asked, "Are we reinforcing the northern forts? I hear supplies are running short." Crawford hesitated, just a second too long. Rourke noticed. "That information is classified," Rourke replied calmly. Pierce raised an eyebrow. "Merely a concern for my ships. Conflict disrupts trade, you know." But Rourke didn't buy it. Later in the evening, when guests drifted to the ballroom, he cornered Crawford near the study. "Senator, why is Pierce so interested in troop logistics?" Crawford lied smoothly. "He's a businessman. War affects profits." Rourke leaned in. "War affects lives, Senator. And tonight, I saw two men far too eager to know our weaknesses." Crawford's chest tightened. "Are you accusing me?" "No, not yet," Rourke answered. But the damage was done. Crawford's hands trembled long after the captain left. The signal in the ledger. Meanwhile, Pierce realized the captain's suspicions were dangerous. He could no longer operate freely. He needed to protect his network. He retrieved a coded ledger hidden inside a false-bottom chest. Its symbols recorded payments to informants, ship routes used by British couriers, and names of sympathizers inside New England shipping guilds. But something was wrong. A page was missing. Someone had taken it. Panic rolled through him. He immediately suspected Elias Crow, a sailor who had left Pierce's employment months earlier with too many questions in his eyes. In truth, the thief was someone far closer. Senator Abel Crawford. In a moment of fear after Rourke's warning, Crawford had sneaked into Pierce's study during the dinner and stolen the page, hoping to understand how deep the merchant's treachery ran. What he found horrified him. Pierce wasn't hedging bets. Pierce was constructing a British advantage, and Crawford was now tangled in his web.
The betrayal that saved a city. Desperate, Crawford arranged a secret meeting with Captain Rourke near the Battery Park shoreline just before dawn. He handed the stolen page to Rourke with shaking hands. "I didn't want it to go this far," Crawford whispered. Rourke scanned the symbols and froze. This is intelligence routing. These codes match British movements from last month." Crawford swallowed. "I thought I could manage both sides. I was wrong." For the first time, Rourke saw something human in the senator. Not malice, but fear. "This page could prevent an attack," Rourke said. And he was right. British forces had planned to intercept an American convoy carrying supplies to northern forts. Thanks to the intelligence on the stolen page, the U.S. Navy rerouted the convoy in time. The attack failed before it began. Pierce would have sent more codes, but that same evening, militia officers raided his warehouse. The double agent was arrested before he could burn his remaining ledgers. When the table finally broke, news spread quietly across the city. Some merchants whispered that Pierce had been framed. Others claimed the British had dozens like him. Crawford resigned days later, citing personal matters, though history never recorded the truth. Captain Rourke, for his part, never bragged about his role. He returned to his militia duties, preparing for the war he had long predicted. And yet he never forgot that in one elegant dining room, over fine silver and polished wine, patriots and traitors had sat shoulder to shoulder, smiling at the same jokes, toasting the same future. The difference between them had been invisible, until the moment it wasn't. A nation built on chosen loyalties. The War of 1812 would later be remembered for naval battles, burning capitals, and stirring national pride. But beneath the cannons and headlines lay a quieter truth. The war was shaped long before the first shot by men and women whose loyalties shifted like tides. Some betrayed their country, some protected it, some, like Crawford, found themselves trapped between honor and fear. But all of them lived in a world where loyalty was not a simple declaration, it was a daily choice. And those choices, hidden behind dinner tables and whispered bargains, changed the fate of a young nation still fighting to define itself.
Across the borderlands, native nations, secret alliances, and unseen negotiations. Behind public treaties, quiet messengers traveled forest trails, carrying diplomatic gambles that could reshape entire frontiers. The night the map nearly changed. In the autumn of 1787, as American lawmakers celebrated their newly drafted Constitution, another kind of meeting took place hundreds of miles west, deep in the Black Swamp country. 3 small fires burned low to keep from being seen. Around them gathered representatives of the Shawnee, Lenape, and Wyandot, joined by 2 French-Canadian traders and a wiry American interpreter named Thomas Givens. Givens was officially an employee of a Virginia land company. Unofficially, he had become a courier for secret messages between native leaders hoping to preserve their homelands and a group of frontier officers who believed war could still be avoided. He was a man walking a knife edge, welcomed by no one, trusted by even fewer. That night, the talk was not of abstract principles or hopeful peace. It was about survival. New American settlers were pouring into the Ohio River Valley, ignoring earlier boundary promises. The older chiefs warned that if the nations did not unite, politically, strategically, culturally, the land itself would vanish beneath surveyor lines. The French traders, who had lived among the tribes for decades, brought troubling news. British agents stationed in Detroit were quietly urging native nations to resist American expansion. They promised weapons, supplies, and support, but only as long as it benefited the crown. It was a dangerous offer, one older leaders recognized as poisoned diplomacy. But there was a third path, one that had not been spoken of publicly. And that is why Givens had been summoned. The messenger who shouldn't have been there. Givens pulled from his coat a packet sewn inside the lining. Inside were folded papers written by a little-known American general stationed at Fort Harmar. The general believed that Congress might be willing to renegotiate parts of the boundary line if the tribes were united enough to demand it, but only if war had not already broken out. No treaties, no signatures, only whispers. The document outlined what could become a radical diplomatic alliance, a coalition of native nations negotiating as one political body with the United States government. Not separate tribes, not splintered councils, but a unified confederation. If accepted, it would change the shape of the frontier. If rejected, war was almost guaranteed. Givens handed the packet to the Shawnee chief, who studied the markings without touching them. The forest was silent except for the crackle of wet leaves. "Tell your general," the chief said quietly, "that nations do not unite in darkness, but neither do they begin war there." It was not a yes, it was not a no, it was an opening. The hidden network that kept the talks alive. Over the next 2 years, small groups of messengers, native scouts, French trappers, frontier interpreters, even a mission-educated Mohawk scribe carried information along routes no army map ever recorded.
These trails formed the invisible diplomacy of the borderlands, along the Maumee River, where bark canoes slipped past American patrols, through the northern forests, where women carried coated wampum belts disguised as trade goods, across the winter ice, where messages were etched into birch bark and hidden under snow-covered caches, inside trading posts, where secrets moved more reliably in barrels of flour than in formal dispatches. This network was never organized on paper. Each messenger knew their piece, but the flow of information, hesitant, fragile, often dangerous, allowed the tribes to avoid an early war that might have been catastrophic. The United States, its power still uncertain, needed time. The native nations needed unity. The borderlands gave them a narrow, shifting middle ground, a turning point in the smoke of fallen timbers. By 1794, the fragile peace finally snapped. Misunderstandings, broken promises, land speculation, and political pressure pushed the region toward open conflict. The Battle of Fallen Timbers ended native hopes of stopping American expansion by force. But the secret years of negotiations had not been wasted. When leaders from multiple native nations arrived at the Treaty of Greenville talks in 1795, they came as a more coordinated body than American officials had expected. They negotiated land boundaries, trade protections, and specific guarantees that earlier treaties had ignored. It was not the alliance they had once envisioned. It did not save all the lands they loved, but it carved out protections that influenced frontier policy for decades. And quietly, in the back of the treaty grounds, Thomas Gibbon stood watching. No one thanked him, few remembered him, yet he carried messages that shaped a diplomatic landscape far larger than himself. The trails that still remember. Most of the secret negotiators left no records. Their work survives only in fragments. A French trader's journal noting a night meeting with northern chiefs. A wampum belt whose pattern suggests encoded assurances of future talks. A U.S. officer's confused complaint that native delegations seemed better informed than expected. But the borderlands remember. The old forest paths, now covered by highways and farmland, once carried the weight of quiet decisions that reshaped a continent. Alliances formed in whispers, agreements carved out in shadows. Diplomacy carried not by diplomats, but by scouts, traders, interpreters, and mothers who risked everything to keep the fragile possibility of peace alive. Before treaties were written, they were walked.
The night London smiled. British spies who nearly broke America from within. From encrypted letters to bribed informants, a hidden British network tried to fracture the young republic's unity. Some nights change history quietly, not with cannon fire or declarations, but with ink, shadows, and whispers. And on one cold evening in 1792, deep inside a town house near London's Whitehall, a group of British officials raised their glasses. The youngest spy in the room later wrote that the smile on their commander's face looked like victory regained without war. They believed they were about to fracture the young American republic from within. They weren't entirely wrong. The web that had no name. After the American Revolution, Britain publicly accepted defeat. Privately, it refused to accept the rise of what it saw as a rebellious, unstable nation. Parliament wanted leverage, economic, political, or, if necessary, covert. So a network took shape. It had no official code name, no signature, and no central command. But its couriers, informants, and infiltrators were scattered from Philadelphia banks to Charleston docks, from frontier garrisons to the halls of Congress. Their mission was simple: turn American factions against each other until the Republic collapsed under its own arguments. This network used three tools: secrecy, money, and ambiguity. The kind that could ruin a nation before it realized it was at war. Encrypted letters in a Philadelphia cellar. The operation's most effective agent was a mild, unremarkable merchant named Elias Turner. He blended into Philadelphia crowds, traded in fabrics and imported teas, and attended congressional debates as casually as other men visited taverns. But beneath his warehouse was a hidden room, accessible only through a false wall behind a stack of West Indies rum barrels. Inside, Turner kept a small desk, a stack of encoded letters, and a specially crafted brass cipher wheel wrapped in oilcloth. Turner's reports were not dramatic. They were far more dangerous than that. He documented which members of Congress hated one another, which state delegations were demanding higher compensation, which frontier territories were growing restless, which newspapermen could be paid to ignite fresh outrage. Turner didn't need to invent chaos. America's political scene was already filled with rivalries. He simply amplified them. His letters crossed the Atlantic hidden in the lining of ship captains' coats, in the false bottoms of crates, and even pressed between layers of parchment in forged customs documents. When London smiled, it was usually because one of Turner's letters had arrived. The bribe that almost changed the presidency. The network reached farther than Turner's pen. In New York, a banker with quiet royalist sympathies laundered British funds. In Virginia, a plantation overseer, deeply in debt, passed along intercepted messages from a prominent political family. In Charleston, a dock worker paid with gold guineas kept watch on foreign ships and reported unusual cargo. But the boldest move came in the winter of 1794. A British intermediary known only as the Whisperer attempted something extraordinary, bribing a high-ranking American official to leak internal debates from the executive branch. The bribe was cleverly disguised as an investment opportunity, shares in a phantom trading company that existed only on London's ledgers. The American official never accepted the offer, but the proposal itself sent a shockwave through President Washington's inner circle when it was discovered. The revelation confirmed what many feared. British intelligence wasn't just spying, it was recruiting. And they were getting close. The night the network nearly succeeded. On a fog-thick night in the spring of 1795, 3 separate events unfolded that convinced London their plan was working. A major northern newspaper published a scandal, fed by forged documents. 2 influential congressmen nearly came to blows on the House floor. Western settlers staged a protest that spiraled dangerously close to a local rebellion. The British spy masters toasted the news. For a brief moment, it seemed the United States, the fragile republic barely a decade old, might actually splinter. The British believed they were witnessing the rebirth of empire in North America, not by force, but by fracture. The turn that London never expected. But a spy network is only as strong as its secrecy. Turner's courier made a mistake, switching ships at the last minute to avoid a storm. The captain of that ship was not one of London's allies. Suspicious of Turner's coded package, he delivered it directly to a customs agent in Philadelphia. Within days, U.S. counterintelligence retrieved the hidden letters, the cipher wheel, and a partial list of operatives. Turner vanished, slipping into the fog of the very streets he once controlled. Some say he fled to Canada. Others claim he boarded a ship for England under a false name. A few believed he stayed in America, living in obscurity, watching the nation he had tried to fracture grow stronger each year. The smile that faded. When news reached London that the network had been compromised, the smile vanished. They had come close, closer than most Americans ever realized, but the Republic had not cracked. It had bent, shaken, argued, stumbled, and shouted, but survived. And perhaps that resilience became the answer Britain never expected. America could fight back, even against enemies it could not see.
Unsung guardians, the ordinary Americans who outwitted empires in the dark. Tavern keepers, frontier scouts, and runaway sailors became the invisible line of defense no official records fully honor. Some heroes never stand on battlefields. They don't wear uniforms, they don't salute to drums, and no statue carries their names. Yet in the years surrounding the War of 1812, while diplomats argued and armies prepared, a quiet army of ordinary Americans protected the young republic from dangers it never publicly acknowledged. Their stories rarely made it into official reports, but history moved because of them. The Tavern with No Sign. In 1811, at the edge of Baltimore's harbor, stood a squat wooden building the locals simply called the Place. It wasn't marked on any map, and it had no sign swinging over the door. Only sailors, fishermen, and dock workers knew it existed. Inside poured the cheapest rum on the Atlantic coast, and behind the bar stood Mary Doyle. To the untrained eye, Mary was simply a tavern keeper, sharp-tongued, quick-witted, and always ready with a rag over her shoulder. But beneath her apron, she kept a small leather ledger filled with notes, unfamiliar accents, suspicious cargo, strange ships that docked under foreign flags, and men who asked too many questions about American troop movements. British agents frequently used taverns as gathering places, believing the chaos of docks made the perfect cover. Mary knew this. She also knew that information was more valuable than drink. Every night she listened. Every morning she sent her notes encoded in the form of grocery lists to a contact in the customs office. Her intelligence exposed at least 3 attempted smuggling operations meant to deliver British money and supplies to American informants. Mary never carried a weapon, but she prevented weapons from entering the wrong hands. And no one outside her harbor ever knew her name. The scout who read forests like books. Far from Baltimore's docks, on the edges of the Ohio frontier, lived Samuel Crow, a half-Shawnee, half-European scout who never quite belonged to either world. But he understood both in ways that made him invaluable. As tensions with Britain grew, British officers relied heavily on frontier messengers to coordinate with sympathetic tribes. Those same messengers relied on hidden forest trails. Trails Crow knew better than any man alive. One autumn evening, Crow discovered the hoof prints of a fast-moving British courier heading south. The tracks were deep, rider heavy with equipment, and the spacing suggested urgency. Crow followed them silently through the forest, avoiding open areas, moving with the wind so no one could hear him. By dawn, he found the courier's camp, but the man never made it to his meeting. Crow intercepted his message, a coded letter promising British weapons to a tribal faction planning to attack an American settlement. Instead of delivering the courier to authorities, a decision that might trigger a larger conflict, Crow quietly erased the courier's trail and destroyed the letter. The settlement remained safe. The attack never came, and both British and American officials remained unaware of the crisis avoided by one man's quiet choices. Crow returned to the forest, unthanked. His life's work was preventing things from happening. The runaway sailor who turned the tide. On a warm evening in 1812, a thin young man named Isaac Fletcher limped off a ship in Charleston. Officially, he was a runaway sailor. Unofficially, he was fleeing the British Navy. But Isaac carried something far more important than fear: the memory of conversations he'd overheard aboard several Royal Navy ships. Conversations revealing Britain's planned blockade strategy for the Atlantic coast. Isaac didn't trust authorities. He had been beaten by officers, threatened by naval press gangs, and treated as nothing more than labor. But after hearing rumors of American ships being seized, he realized the republic he'd once dismissed as chaotic was now his best chance at freedom. So he found a local dock worker who knew a magistrate. The dock worker knew a customs agent. The customs agent knew a Navy officer. Within days, American naval planners possessed the first accurate map of the blockade to come, drawn entirely from Isaac's memory. His information allowed American commanders to avoid early ambushes and reposition several key ships before the British trapped them inland. Isaac never saw the Navy report with his intelligence. He lived quietly on the coast afterward, repairing nets and hauling cargo. But his mind had changed the shape of the coastline's defenses. The Guardians history forgot. Mary Doyle, Samuel Crowe, Isaac Fletcher, none of them appear in the grand paintings of the War of 1812. There are no medals bearing their likenesses, no parades celebrating their courage, no textbooks recounting their sacrifices. But their work, silent, improvised, and deeply human, protected an unsteady nation from empires determined to break it. They weren't generals. They weren't spies by training. They were ordinary people who understood something extraordinary. Sometimes, a republic survives not because of its armies, but because of its citizens. A tavern keeper with quick ears, a scout who followed the forest's whispers, a runaway sailor carrying dangerous memory. They stood watch in the shadows, outwitting empires that underestimated them. And though history rarely records their names, the nation they protected still stands, built not only by famous heroes, but by the unsung guardians who defended it in the dark.
Buried in silence, the heroes history forgot and the secrets they carried to their graves. When peace was declared, the bravest stories were sealed, leaving behind legends that still whisper through the nation's memory. Some chapters of history end not with celebrations, but with quiet departures. Men and women walking home from unseen battles, carrying secrets no nation ever officially acknowledged. When the War of 1812 closed and the Treaty of Ghent promised peace, crowds cheered, cannons fired in salute, and newspapers hailed the return of normalcy. But beneath the noise of victory was a silence just as powerful, a silence belonging to those who had served in the shadows. Their stories weren't written, their names weren't recorded, but the nation they protected still remembers them in fragments, rumors, and whispers. This is the story of the heroes buried in silence. The woman who vanished after the treaty. In the snowy January of 1815, just weeks after the treaty was signed, a woman known only as the Widow Clark packed her belongings into a single cedar trunk in a small house outside Montreal. She had lived there for 3 years, though she wasn't Canadian, nor was she a widow. Her real name was Margaret Hale. During the war, Hale worked as one of America's most effective undercover couriers. Using her identity as a grieving wife, she moved behind British lines without suspicion, delivering coded messages from American envoys to frontier scouts and tribal negotiators. Her talent was not stealth, but storytelling. She could invent, with perfect emotional precision, a tale of loss, illness, or desperation, convincing enough to fool hardened officers. Her final task was the most dangerous, carrying the first unofficial confirmations that Britain was preparing to negotiate peace. She completed the mission, but when the war ended, she did not come home. Some say she feared retaliation. Others whispered she had fallen in love with a man in Canada. A few believed she carried one last secret, one too dangerous to bring across the border. Whatever the truth, her name never appeared in official records. The government erased her trail to protect her. She lived quietly in the Canadian countryside until the day she died, her past hidden behind a false identity she never put down. Her grave marker, unremarkable, worn by winter, bears a single inscription, M.H., 1778 to 1842. Nothing more. But in the archives of early American intelligence, a faded note remains. The widow Clark completed all tasks successfully. The scout who watched his own legend fade. On the western frontier, where the forests of Ohio thinned into open plains, a Shawnee American scout named Nathan Running Fox returned to find his world changed. Before the war, he had guided American detachments, translated tribal agreements, and intercepted British messengers moving across the borderlands. His knowledge of the land had saved entire settlements from coordinated attacks. Yet after peace came, the Army no longer needed his skills. The new United States, expanding westward, grew suspicious of anyone who moved comfortably between native nations and American towns. Running Fox carried a secret heavier than betrayal. He had brokered an unofficial truce between two tribal factions and an American captain, a truce that prevented a massive three-sided conflict during the war's last year. The treaty was never written down. It existed only in memories and handshakes. But after the war, the captain died of fever. The tribal elders who witnessed the agreement scattered or fell in later conflicts, and Running Fox realized he was the last living guardian of a pact that had prevented thousands of deaths. So he kept it to himself. For decades he lived on the edges of maps, guiding travelers for small coins, visiting tribal camps quietly at night, offering advice no one asked for, but many desperately needed. He died in 1837 during a winter storm on a ridge overlooking the river he once protected. Only his footprints in the snow remembered him. The sailor who knew too much. Isaac, or Ike Mallory, had spent years aboard American privateer ships during the war, seizing British cargo and relaying the Royal Navy's movements back to American ports. But the most valuable thing he ever brought home wasn't a prize ship. It was knowledge. Mallory knew which British admirals had been secretly planning a full blockade of the American coastline, knowledge that had allowed U.S. commanders to reposition their ships and prevent a naval disaster. After the war, American officials thanked him quietly and sent him home with a modest payment, reminding him that secrecy was still necessary. Britain had powerful allies. If certain names leaked, retaliation was possible. Mallory obeyed. He returned to his hometown of Salem and tried to resume the life he'd left behind. But he never again trusted calm seas or clear skies. His war had taught him that peace could be an illusion, and that the empires of Europe kept watch even when treaties were signed. What haunted him most was a final whispered warning from a captured British officer. "We may forgive the politicians, Mallory, but we never forget the spies." Mallory died anonymously in 1848, found slumped beside the docks he once defended, his last possessions a worn sea jacket and a sealed envelope addressed to no one. Inside was a single line, "Some truths must drown with me." The secrets they kept, the nation they shaped. None of these individuals appear in textbooks or military registers. Their courage lived in shadows, in unmarked graves, in memories passed from parent to child and eventually lost. Yet their silent work shaped the nation. Margaret Hale's message ensured peace negotiations began sooner. Nathan Running Fox's hidden truce prevented an explosive frontier war. Isaac Mallory's intelligence saved American ships from entrapment. They carried burdens too heavy to share, too complex to explain, too dangerous to reveal. Their sacrifices created the illusion that peace came swiftly and naturally, when in truth, dozens of invisible hands were guiding the nation away from catastrophe. History often celebrates the generals and presidents, but it is built on the backs of the quiet ones, the watchers, the messengers, the interpreters, the men and women who knew that their reward might be nothing more than the chance to survive. The whisper that remains. Today, in archives across the country, faint traces of them remain. A coded note, a false identity, a worn leather map with initials no one recognizes. They are the ghosts standing behind America's early victories, the invisible guardians who slipped back into ordinary life before the world ever learned their names. And though the world may never fully know what they carried, the nation still stands on the secrets they took to their graves.